Paul Bielatowicz here, and I am currently on tour with Carl Palmer's ELP Legacy. Here we are in the van, our glamorous touring van. All of our gear is in the trailer behind us, which you can't really see. And Dyanne Klinko has asked me to do a short interview for you guys on Emerson, Lake and Palmer Titans of Prague Facebook group. And so first of all, I want to say a huge thank you to Dyanne. Sorry, just putting my Starbucks coffee down there. I want to say a huge thank you to Dyanne for organising this and for thinking of me and thinking of you guys. What a great Facebook group she runs. Really appreciate everything you do on there, Dyanne. And over the last couple of weeks, she has been asking for questions that you might want to ask me. So I have got a bunch of questions here. So without further ado, let's get stuck in and answer these questions. So the first question I have here is from David Harris, and David asks, what are your feelings about playing with Steve Hackett? So for those of you who don't know, back in a few years ago, it all runs together. We did a tribute to Keith Emerson in Miami, and we had a few guests. There was Mark Stein from Vanilla Fudge, and there was Steve Hackett on guitar, and both of them were amazing. And the thing that really struck me about Steve is what a lovely, humble guy he is. And I always say, you know, the thing that I really aspire to is to have a unique sound on the guitar. You know, I'm not trying to. It's not a competition. You know, being an artist of any kind, you just want to have your unique style. You want to do something different. And Steve Hackett is definitely one of those guys that as soon as he starts playing, it's like, that's Steve Hackett right there. So yes, it was really inspiring to be stood next to him, hearing him play like Steve Hackett, funnily enough, and you know, a few shivers down the spine moments there. So yeah, that was very cool. And another question from David Harris: how did you adapt to playing the parts of the maestro on guitar? Well, the maestro presumably is Keith Emerson. I mean, Keith Emerson, what a phenomenal musician, and not only keyboard player but musician. How did I adapt his parts to the guitar? Well, me and Simon kind of split them between us, so it's not like I'm playing everything Keith plays. If there's a particularly kind of complicated two-handed lick on a keyboard, then we'll split that between us. Sometimes Simon's playing the melody, sometimes I'm playing the melody, and sometimes vice versa. Simon's taking some of the keyboard solos, I'm taking some of the keyboard solos. So it's kind of split between us. Obviously, it is still tricky because Keith is not thinking like a guitar player, and there are moments where I'm playing kind of two parts at once. The thing that springs to mind is all the little fills in Bitch's Crystal. Doing that in a two-handed accompaniment and melody manner. But yeah, having a bass player like Simon in the band, it really makes it a lot easier than you might think, because it means that Simon, you know, between us, we can get quite close to what Keith was doing on his own. So yeah, that really helps. Plus he's sat in front of me, so I've got to say nice things about him right now. Here's Simon reading his book. Between you and me, I do all the hard work. He just plays root notes. All right, here's one from Ed Morgan. What songs are you singing on? So I have started singing this tour, and that was partly inspired by the Royal Affair tour, where, well, I took on more on the Royal Affair tour because Simon wasn't with us, and we had a great bass player called David Pistorius, and David is amazing groove player, slap player, just phenomenal improviser, really good. But one thing that David had not had experience with was effects pedals. He's like a purist, you know, he plugs straight into the amp and away he goes and just sounds great like that. With this band, obviously we're emulating keyboard parts, so we really needed somebody or something to bring more of the keyboard parts to the table. So I started playing with MIDI sounds. So now I am triggering keyboard parts and keyboard sounds using my feet, and also getting like organ and synth sounds to double along with what I'm playing on guitar. So from that, I just kind of, I was inspired how much that kind of lifted the sound of the band. And we had Arthur Brown singing with us, and that really added a lot as well, having vocals in there. So I just thought, well, maybe I could add a little bit more and start doing some of these songs. I'd done it in the past, but just using a vocoder pedal. But I decided to book a few singing lessons, and here I am singing for Carl's band. So the question from Ed was, what songs are you singing on? I am singing on Carnival 9 First Impression Part 2, otherwise known as Welcome Back My Friends to the Show That Never Ends. I am singing on Knife Edge, on Lucky Man, 21st Century Schizoid Man, and Tarkus. So 5 songs in all. So there you go. And hopefully, well, I've had some very positive comments after the show, so it seems like people coming to the shows are enjoying it, so that's all I can ask for. Another actually somebody might have asked it later on, but anyway, I'll throw this in anyway. But a lot of people have said, have you felt nervous about singing? And funnily enough, no, not at all. And I think the reason I don't feel nervous about singing is that I don't consider myself a singer, so I don't really feel like I've got anything to prove. I don't really feel like, you know, I have any reputation to maintain, anything like that. So yeah, so I don't feel like the same about my singing as I do about my guitar playing. So there you go. Alright, on to the next question. Can you share your latest album, and what and when will you be touring? Well, I only have one solo album out at the moment. That's Preludes and Etudes, released in, I'm not sure what year. I'm not very good at years, as you can see. So yeah, I've only got one solo album, but I have enough material for probably 2 more. So next year, the plan is for the start of the year for me to write and, well, not write, it's all written, to record my second solo album. And right now what I am doing is I've got a page on a platform called Patreon. It's basically where people can follow along with me on tours. They get to come to any sound check we do for free. There's all sorts of perks on there, updates from backstage, and I do weekly live streaming sessions and downloads and all sorts of things. Even send people handwritten postcards from the road. Anyway, the reason I'm telling you this is that when I got to 100 patrons, I recorded and wrote a song called the Patreon Name Song, which featured everybody's name in the song, all 100 names. It turned out to be a few more than 100 names, and I wanted to outdo myself. So I said that when I got to 200 patrons, what I was going to do is I was going to write an individual piece of music for every single person. That's 200 individual pieces of music. So I think some of those, obviously they'll find their way to people on my Patreon page first, but some of those may make their way onto one of these 2 albums as well. So we'll see. Okay, can you share with us where you trained with your music and when you got started? I as a guitarist, I kind of consider myself largely self-taught. I had a great first guitar teacher who basically gave me a load of transcriptions, and you know, I learned a load of songs, and it was a really good way to get started. I did about a year of learning songs and solos and stuff like that. It was a really good start, and then kind of taught myself the improvising stuff and a lot of music theory. I did actually do a degree in jazz for my sins at Leeds College of Music, but you know, a lot of the stuff probably shows in my playing, because a lot of the stuff that I do, it's all worked out on my own, really. It's kind of, I do come from that school of thought where you need to find your own unique niche, and you need to find your own unique ways of playing and ways of thinking about the instrument. So I was really big into that. I've always been big into that, and so, you know, one of my biggest influences as an instrument is the piano. So I take a lot of those piano ideas on and put them onto guitar. So yeah, so although I went to music college, I do consider myself largely self-taught. How did you get started playing ELP music or learning ELP music? The answer to that is simple. I joined Carl's band. I'd love to tell you that I was the biggest ELP fan in the world before I joined Carl's band, but it just wasn't true. I wasn't really aware of the band too much. I heard Carl was looking for a guitar player, so I sent him a CD of my music, and for whatever reason, maybe the classical influence, he liked my CD and chose me for the band, and next thing I knew, we were rehearsing for a tour. And so that was the most intense learning experience of my life. Every single piece that I played in Carl's band was the hardest piece I'd ever played. So yeah, it was a very intense start to my professional touring career. Okay, where did that passion come from? Well, I mean, I've always loved music. You know, my dad is an artist. He was an art teacher. He's now retired, but he still makes art and creates. And I think, you know, I've been growing up around that. You know, same with my mum as well. She's quite a creative as well. So growing up around that, being creative and being inspired to be creative, it seemed like the natural thing to do. It's always really been a part of my life. How many different instruments do I play? I play one. I play the guitar. Have you learned anything from Carl and Simon with music and travel? Yeah, absolutely. With Carl, I mean, the whole experience of touring and playing live and playing music to this level in front of an audience, that's a big thing. I always say, we've just done a masterclass camp thing, Carl Palmer's prog rock camp, and I was saying to students there that there's a big difference between playing something at any level, but particularly something really complicated. There's a big difference playing something really complicated in your bedroom or in your studio or even among friends, and then playing it on stage with all the lights flashing and the adrenaline pumping, and you know, the stage is dark, and it's a big difference with playing stuff like that. So I think that's probably what I learnt to start off with. I learnt to kind of tame my mind a little bit, where, you know, there's all sorts of thoughts and emotions and feelings racing through your brain, and you have to learn to control that when you're playing on a loud, exciting stage, because otherwise it can get in the way of the music. It can add to it as well, but it can really get into the way of the music, particularly when you're playing something so complicated and involved. All right, can you share some funny on the road stories? Okay, first one that springs to mind is coming back. We just did the Royal Affair tour with Arthur Brown, and of course Arthur Brown, being the god of hellfire, dresses up in makeup. Now, we played one show in Canada, and after our show we went straight across the border and got a hotel in the US, just so we were back and we wouldn't have to deal with immigration in the morning. So in the middle of the night, we got to the US border. They got everyone to go out and go into the office to go through immigration and show the passports and everything. And then, and only then, did we realise that Arthur Brown was in his full-on God of Hellfire regalia, complete with costume, top hat, and crazy face makeup. And the guys in immigration didn't, it was like he was just the most normal guy there, didn't even bat an eyelid. It's like they'd seen it all before, but we were all in hysterics. We thought it was hilarious. So that's probably the most recent thing I can think of. Can you talk about your singing lessons, and will you be ready for Lucky Man? Well, I certainly hope so, because I have been singing Lucky Man on this tour. We've done 5 shows so far, I think, and 5 or 6 shows, so I've been singing Lucky Man every night. Can I tell you about my singing lessons? Yes. I have singing lessons with a person called Deborah Perry. You can check her out on Facebook. She's in New Bedford, Massachusetts, which is a city close to where I live in Massachusetts. And she teaches the Genie Diva technique of rib cage expansion. And it is, it's all to do with posture, really. But the first few weeks we just spent on working the muscles to open the rib cage, so the diaphragm was free to do all of the control of the voice rather than letting the rib cage muscles get involved. And I must say, it has made a remarkable difference. When I go back to the singing with a technique without using the rib cage expansion, easy for me to say, rib cage expansion, I can really hear a difference. The tone sounds more strained, and it's doesn't sound as clear at all. So yeah, it's made a big difference. When will you have a tour in the US when we can hear you sing and play? I am currently on a tour in the US where you can hear me sing and play. You can get all the dates from either my website, www.bielatowicz.com, or Carl's website, carlpalmer.com. How did it feel to start being the vocalist in the Carl Palmer band? Felt, yeah, good. I mean, I think I mentioned this before, but I didn't really feel any pressure about it. I felt like I was bringing something functional to the band. I feel like it was kind of the same as bringing the MIDI stuff. It's just adding another element. I mean, do I feel like a singer? No, I don't feel like a singer. I'm still a guitar player. And again, for that reason, I don't feel any pressure about my vocals, because I'm just trying to do my best for the band and just add something else to the band that will hopefully give fans and listeners a better experience. So yeah, so I feel good about it. I feel like I'm hopefully bringing another element. I feel like throughout the evolution of the band, there's been lots of elements added, and this is just the next one. And I'm sure there'll be more as well when we get Simon dancing. No reaction for Simon. How challenging is it to cover Keith Emerson's keyboard parts on guitar? It is challenging. I mean, even just getting down to things like the single line stuff. Keith, he did a lot of stuff in fourths, the interval of a fourth, a lot of those sort of runs. And even though the guitar is tuned in fourths, you might think that would be an easy thing. It's not really. It doesn't really lend itself to a very guitar-y way of approaching it. So that's when all of the two-handed tapping comes in, treating the guitar a little bit more like a keyboard. That really helps. And I've been doing that long before I've been in Carl's band. So I guess I was already in that way of thinking. So, but of course, it's challenging. I mean, it'd be challenging if it was any master musician, never mind a keyboard player. So, have you ever considered playing 12-string guitar? I have a 12-string guitar. I use it in the studio sometimes for kind of textures. acoustic guitar textures. Usually use it quite low in the mix, but it's a really nice Yamaha that somebody gave to me. Really nice guitar. I think my headphones have just died, so I'm going to stop this recording and see if that is the case. Okay, so back without headphones. So the question was, have you considered playing 12-string guitar? So yeah, I have a 12-string acoustic, as I say, and really nice for the studio. I wouldn't use it with Carl. It's not really, well, I think to carry an acoustic around on tour, it's not really that practical. And also, I feel like we get a lot of the sounds just from the electric instrument. So yeah, probably wouldn't use a 12-string with Carl. But hey, that could be the next element that I was talking about. Do you prefer picks or fingering? Personally, I prefer fingerstyle and tapping. Whenever I do a solo show, very often I don't even take a pick. Very often I'll do a solo show, just lots of tapping, and I play an archtop guitar for a lot of my solo shows. So yeah, very often I won't use a pick. For Carl's band, I mean, those fast melodies, those fast aggressive guitar solos, can't really do those without a pick, or at least I can't do those without a pick, so then I use a pick then. But for the most part, if I had a choice to play my solo stuff, I'd probably do it without a pick. Can you list for us all the albums you have? Oh, I think we've already answered that one. Is it? Moving on then, from Buzz Delano. How did it happen that you played with Carl? Well, that was a case of just hearing that Carl was looking for a guitar player, sending him a CD, he liked the CD, so then I had about 2 months, I think, to learn all of the material, and it was the most intense 2 months in my life. So which brings me to the next question from Buzz, which is, what was the first piece of music you played with or for him? First piece of music, well, I can't remember the first piece of music I played with him. Maybe Hoedown? I say that because I think Hoedown and Bullfrog were the first two pieces of music that I learned. They stuck out to me as being particularly appealing to learn, so I got stuck in just learning something that I wanted to learn. What was the hardest ELP piece for you to learn? That's a question from David Harris. Well, David, as I said before, probably any one of the pieces that I learnt at the start when I joined Carl's band, just because it was such an intense 2 months of learning all of that material, a full set's worth of material. Yeah, so that was a really intense time. But in terms of pieces that stick out, maybe Tarkus, because it's quite long, there's a lot going on in it. One thing that I also struggled with was Bitch's Crystal, because you've got some fills there where I play melody and accompaniment, melody in one hand and accompaniment in the other ones. Dun 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 dun, that thing. So that was quite difficult, just to kind of switch between those. And the other thing that I found quite difficult to nail was knife edge, and in particular the Bach section that happens in knife edge. Now, I said earlier about the having to clear your mind and having to kind of get into the zone when you're on stage to try and get away from or to try and put out of your mind all of the adrenaline and the flashing lights on stage and the excitement of the audience. And that is definitely, the Bach section in Knife Edge is definitely one of those moments where you do have to kind of go into some sort of meditative state, not wanting to sound too zen, but it's definitely you definitely have to still your mind and just get into that zone for that moment. And it's just come out of a really exciting guitar solo as well, where I run to the front of the stage and wail at the front of the stage and shred, and then I've completely got to switch gears in my mind to a much more still place where I can kind of get into the zone and play this Bach piece. So yeah, that was quite a tough thing to learn how to play live, even if you know, it wasn't. I mean, it's not the most difficult thing. If you were reading it or something like that, it's not the most virtuosic thing. It's just a real concentration thing. And a lot of this music is about the concentration rather than about how fast or nimbly you can use your fingers. It's about how it's a mind game. You know, how can you remember all of this stuff and keep the concentration to remember all this stuff. So yeah, I think that probably is what some people don't realise. You know, technically demanding it is mentally demanding. That is where it is really tough. It's the mentally demanding part of it. Okay, and the last question from Buzz Delano again. Ask him to talk about his approach to translating keyboard music to the guitar. Well, my approach to translating keyboard music to the guitar. I've been doing it for so long, to be honest, Buzz. I'm not. It's kind of become second nature to me now. When I was a teenager, I was arranging piano parts, classical piano parts for guitar, and classical piano pieces. But I kind of don't think like a guitarist anymore. I think a lot more like a keyboard player, I guess. But there's definitely some problem solving going on. It's very satisfying when you find a solution to the problem of how can I play those two parts. Obviously, very often, a lot of the arrangement has to do with me. I mean, I can see the stuff on paper, but it's not really that helpful to see it on paper always, because you really want to hear what the important aspects, or at least what you perceive to be the important aspects in something, because I'm not going to be able to play all the notes, or me and Simon aren't going to be able to play all the notes because it wouldn't sound right, it'd sound a bit muddy or whatever. So it is definitely a case of picking and choosing what you feel like are the most important notes in a chord, what notes in a specific chord are giving the that chord or that harmony its character. And sometimes it's possible to play all of the notes in a chord, but you just don't want to, because, you know, the sound of the guitar, the crunchiness of the guitar or whatever, is not really lending itself to the same effect that you want to get across. You want to accentuate the specific parts of the music and maybe downplay other parts of the music that might get in the way of what you're actually trying to make it sound like. What else can I say about an approach to playing keyboard parts? I don't know. I mean, definitely thinking of different techniques helps. So it's got to a point where when I hear something, I think, oh yeah, that'll be a tapping part, that'll be a picking part, that'll be a sweep picking part, that'll be a finger picking part. You can kind of hear that a specific guitar technique will lend itself to a specific texture on keyboards. So that goes into it. By the way that we learn these is simply from the recordings. We just transcribe it all. We don't use any music. One thing I have used in the past for a little bit of a cheat are MIDI files. Now, there's a ton of ELP MIDI files online. For those of you who don't know what a MIDI file is, it's basically it's like digital music data that's designed to be played by either a MIDI file player or a keyboard with MIDI sounds on it. It doesn't contain any sounds on it, it just contains note data that then can be fed into a sequencer or MIDI file player, and that will convert that and use it to play all its inbuilt sounds. So sometimes I'll use a MIDI file, and there are, as I say, hundreds of ELP MIDI files online, just available to download for free. and I'll use that as the start of the basis of a transcription. I'll take the keyboard part on there, and I will transcribe it as well, but it's a bit of a shortcut when I'm not just transcribing everything from scratch. It's rather I'm checking how accurate this MIDI file is, and then you know, making, inevitably there will be some alterations to make, because these are, you know, people are just doing this for free. They're just doing it as a hobby. I mean, some of them are incredibly accurate, and some of them are just kind of approximations. But it's always a good starting point. But for the most part, it's just going to the recordings from the original ELP catalogue and transcribing it and seeing if I can arrange it from there. Alright, well that's all of the questions answered. This was a real pleasure. A huge thank you again to Dyanne Klinko for setting this up and arranging this and asking all of you guys. And thank you anybody who asked the questions. If you want to follow along with what I'm up to, then you can check out my Facebook page. And if you want to follow along in a more in-depth way, then check out my Patreon page, which is patreon.com/Paul Bielatowicz. I'm sure Dyanne can put a link in this video. And as I say, anybody on that page gets free access to any sound check of a concert they're coming to, so, and a whole load of other things. So check it out. Thanks again, Dyanne, really appreciate this, and thank you everybody for supporting and loving the music of ELP. Thanks guys, bye.